It is the cold February morning in the year 1184, and in the Japanese capital of Heiankyo, crowds of people are lining the main street of Suzaku Avenue. Among the throngs of spectators is a young woman, accompanied by two attendants, who pushes her way through the crowd, desperate to see what is occurring on the street. This woman had once worn the robes of the nobility, but now she wears the plain clothes of a nun, for in recent months she has been in hiding in Daikakuji Temple. The woman turns to her attendant. "Can you see him?" she asks. "No, my lady," the older woman replies. The young woman finally squeezes herself towards the front of the crowd and peers over the shoulders of the people lining the street, and what she sees makes her heart recoil in horror and disgust. For all the way down the long avenue which connects the Rashomon Gate to the Imperial Palace, she sees a line of Genji warriors, their white banners fluttering in the breeze. Some of the warriors are marching on foot, others proceed slowly on horseback. Each warrior holds aloft the decapitated head of a man, trophies from their most recent battle, the heads of Heike warriors who died at the great clash at Ichi-no-Tani. Some of the heads are so badly disfigured they are unrecognizable, but others draw a shocked response from the onlookers when they recognize who the decapitated head once belonged to. "Is that Lord Tadanori?" asks one onlooker. "And that one looks like that's Lord Tomomori's son, Tomoakira." "Yes, and there's the young Atsumori. He can't have been more than 16 years old." At that moment, one of the mounted samurai holds aloft his trophy and declares to the crowd, "Behold the face of the Heike Lord Mishimori, nephew of Lord Kiyomori, son of Norimori, defender of the castle at Ichi-no-Tani, slain by my sword, the sword of Sasaki Takatsuna." There is cheering among many of the onlookers, weeping among others, while some keep a more neutral expression, wary that the clash between the two rival samurai clans is yet to be resolved, and it is still possible that the tables will turn once again. The young woman in the crowd continues to scour the parade up and down, for she is looking for any sign of her husband, the Heike Lord Koremori, eldest grandson of the late warlord Kiyomori, and the man who had led the Heike army in an ill-fated battle against the Genji at Kurikawa Pass. Following the Heike's defeat at that battle, and their flight from the capital some months ago, she has not seen her husband. Now she fears he may have been killed in the slaughter that has just taken place on the beach at Ichi-no-Tani. "My lady," one of her attendants forces her way to her side, "I have great news. Lord Koremori, he was not at Ichi-no-Tani." "What? Is it true?" the young woman asked. "Apparently he was taken ill a few days before, so he never made the crossing from Yashima. As far as anyone knows, he is still alive." The young woman collapses in relief, while the grisly parade continues up the road. At the very end of the procession, the crowds now see an ox-drawn carriage. Its side doors open so that everyone can observe the Genji's prize captive. The man inside stares resolutely ahead, ignoring the taunts and the jeers and the refuse that is thrown at him by onlookers as he passes by. He wears a tall eboshi hat and an indigo-dyed robe, but both are now spattered with dirt. Ahead of him rides a Genji warrior in impressive gold-trimmed armor, who commands more than 30 guards who ride before and after the carriage. "Behold the criminal, Shigehira," declares the mounted samurai. "Son of the Lord Kiyomori, defender of the Eastern Gate at Ikuta Wood, the man who burned down the temples of Nara and who slaughtered men, women and children. Now a prisoner of the retired emperor Go Shirakawa, brought to justice at my hand, Kagesue Kajiwara." Again there is a mixture of cheers and groans as the crowd look with astonishment and pity at a man who has fallen from such a great height. "Poor man," says one of the onlookers. "What karma was it that this should happen to him of all Kiyomori's sons?" "Yes," says another, "but he got what he deserved. He burned the temples of Nara. This must be his retribution." The parade of captured heads and the prized prisoner now turns eastward towards the river and reaches the crossing at Hachijo Horikara. There, the 35-year-old captive Shigehira is taken from his carriage and placed in a prison cell. The crowds gradually disperse, for the parade is now over. Shigehira now finds himself alone and uncertain as to his future, or even if he will have any. Alone in his cell, he thinks back to those closing moments on the beach at Ichi-no-Tani, the fall of the Eastern Gate, the retreat to the shoreline, his horse rearing up after being struck with an arrow, He sees himself crawling across the sand, reaching out, the Heike boats tantalizingly just out of reach. And then he sees a band of Genji warriors racing up to grab him before he can end his own life. He is shaken from his reverie when he hears the guards outside his door move aside and an elderly man with a sour expression enters the cell. He wears the red robe of the court nobility and carries a sword and baton. The man looks down at Shigehira. "My name is Sadanaga, and I come on behalf of the retired emperor, His Majesty Go Shirakawa." Shigehira gazes up at him and sighs. "And you have come to, what, dispense punishment on the damned?" "No, I have come to deliver a message." The envoy allows a thin smile. "The retired emperor has this to say to you. If you wish to return to Yashima, you will make contact with the rest of your clan. You are to instruct your brothers to restore the 3 imperial regalia to the capital immediately: the sacred sword, the mirror, and the jewel. If these are returned, then you may go back to your family. That is the burden of his message." Shigehira gives a rueful smile and shakes his head. Not for the lives of 1,000 or 10,000 Shigehiras would Lord Munemori or any man of the Heike trade away the regalia, although I suspect my mother might, out of love for her son. "So you will not pass on His Majesty's command?" Shigehira glares at the envoy. "Why should I help the man who betrayed us to the Genji after all the years that my family served him? Has the retired emperor forgotten the services rendered by my house over many reigns, as well as my father's repeated acts of devotion?" For a moment the envoy is taken aback by Shigehira's defiance, then slowly approaches him, his hand resting lightly on his sword, saying, "You know, the retired emperor has not quite decided what to do with you, Shigehira. He could have you executed on the spot, of course, but that would be a waste. Or he could pass you to the monks of Nara. They are demanding that we transfer you to their hands, and I am sure they are already thinking of many creative ways to punish the man who burned down their temples and killed thousands of their people." Shigehira glares at the emperor's messenger, then looks away. The envoy continues, "If, however, you were to comply with His Majesty's request, I am sure we could find a way to avoid the outcome. Instead, you will be transferred to Kamakura to be placed in the custody of Lord Yoritomo. I suspect you will have a less unpleasant experience there than you would with the warrior monks at Nara." There is a long pause while Shigehira looks down forlornly at the floor. Finally he looks up. "Very well. I will write to my family in Yashima." "Good," the envoy smiles. "I am sure you will write the finest letter you can." Some days later, the leading members of the Heike clan gather in a council chamber at their stronghold of Yashima, a volcanic island separated by a narrow strait from the town of Takamatsu, some 200 kilometers to the west of the capital. In recent weeks, the Heike have been recovering from their defeat at the hands of the Genji general Yoshitsune at the Battle of Ichi-no-Tani. A dozen of their leading clansmen have been killed in that disastrous confrontation, including many of the sons of the Heike leaders, who are now dealing with their own personal grief in addition to the pressures of military leadership. However, the bulk of the Heike army successfully evacuated from the beach before the Genji could wipe them out, and, crucially, the Heike returned to Yashima with both the infant emperor and the 3 Imperial Treasures. The eldest Heike brother, Munemori, rises and addresses his clan. "As you have probably heard," he says, "we have received a message from the retired emperor Go Shirakawa. It is in the hand of my brother Shigehira. I recognize his writing, but the voice is not his. I'll read you what he says. It has been more than a year since our hallowed young emperor began a progress to the provinces, and now, to the consternation of the court and the ruin of the realm, the 3 regalia lie in obscurity on Shikoku. As to Lord Shigehira, the rebellious subject who burned down Todaiji, while he fully deserves the death penalty, he is currently a prisoner and severed from the company of his fellows. As a caged bird longs for the clouds, he longs to soar 1,000 leagues across the southern ocean on his homeward journey." Pardon shall be his on the condition that you reverently return the 3 imperial regalia. His Imperial Eminence has spoken. These are his words, etc., etc., and so on. Munimori passes the parchment to his brother Tomomori, who takes it with a raised eyebrow. So, asks Munimori, how should we respond? Munimori's sister, the Lady Kenremonin, who sits at his side, asks, There is no mention of the infant emperor? Ha, says Tomomori, who passes the parchment to her. See for yourself. That's how much he cares about your son, Tokugo. He just cares about his treasures. I knew the old man was ruthless, but... So, Munimori persists, what do you recommend we do? Tomomori grunts. Well, look, I hate the idea of my brother languishing in a cell, but Shigehiro was a fool to let himself get captured. He should have taken his own life while he had the chance, to avoid this humiliation, and then... As he speaks, he realizes everyone has turned their head and is looking at a figure in the doorway to the chamber. The clansmen bow their heads as an elderly woman enters. She is Lady Ni, the widow of the late warlord Kiyomori, and it is rare that she attends a council meeting. The elderly woman walks past the silent samurai, holding a letter clasped to her face as if to disguise her tears. She then slowly bends her knees and prostrates herself before Munimori. Please, my son, she says, if only for my sake, return the regalia to the capital. Munimori looks around to the other samurai, who refuse to meet his gaze. Munimori, she continues, how dreadful your brother must be feeling. I have received a letter from him and I am at my wit's end. He implores me to intercede, otherwise he says he will never see us again in his life. My only wish in this life is to see him again. Were I to hear that Shigehiro is gone, I would wish only to follow him. At this, many of the samurai have been reduced to tears, and Munimori desperately looks to his brother for support. Tomomori takes a long breath and says, Mother, I understand your feelings, but even if we did return the regalia to the capital, they would never, ever really send Shigehiro back. You may think we can trust Go Shirakawa, but we can't. I am sorry, but our only choice is to refuse. The Lady Ni breaks down in tears, and Munimori rises to announce that he will consider the Heike's response. After the council meeting, Munimori makes his way alone to the most heavily guarded room in the stronghold. At the entrance to a small chamber, he nods to the guard, who unlocks the door and stands aside. Inside the room are 3 boxes, each just a foot or so in length, one somewhat larger than the others. As he approaches the boxes, he senses that he can almost feel their power. Gingerly he touches each in turn. As he approaches the larger box, he thinks he can almost feel a faint hum, a vibration. He briefly considers opening it, then hesitates. What power do these treasures contain, he asks himself. Why does the retired emperor value these above everything, more than even the life of the boy emperor himself? Munimori sighs and calls for the guard to open the door. I'm sorry, brother, he thinks to himself. If Go Shirakawa values these treasures so highly, I cannot let them go, even for you, not now. Meanwhile, more than 600 kilometers to the east, all is silent in the Genji capital of Kamakura, where the night hours are slowly turning into dawn. As the first light breaks through the clouds, a figure dressed in the robes of a lady-in-waiting and in the company of a small group of women emerges onto the courtyard. The figure carefully mounts a horse and quietly steers it to the gatehouse. The rider nods to the guards, who wave the horse through. The next day, all appears normal. But then, at one point in the afternoon, a Genji attendant notices something strange. The young son-in-law of Lord Yoritomo, a young man named Shimizu Yoshitaka, is playing a game of dice, but the attendant can't help feeling something is odd. Eventually he approaches the young man and raises his face to the light. Then he calls in alarm, for the young man playing dice is not Yoritomo's son-in-law, but an imposter. The The imposter, a boy named Shotaro, is brought to Yoritomo, who is incensed and demands to know what has happened. Shotaro explains that the previous day, the young Yoshitaka had decided to escape from Kamakura because he feared his father-in-law Yoritomo's wrath. As the eldest surviving son of the defeated rebel, Kiso Yoshinaka, he expected that his father-in-law would soon order his execution, despite the fact that the young man is married to Yoritomo's daughter, Ohime. And so, in the middle of the night, he had fled on horseback from Kamakura, disguised as a court lady. He had even taken the precaution of wrapping his horse's hooves in cloth to prevent it from making any noise. And for almost the whole day, nobody had realized he was gone, because his friend Shotaro had managed to pretend that he was here all along. Shotaro begs for forgiveness, which Yoritomo reluctantly gives. But after the boy leaves, Yoritomo calls on one of his retainers, Hori Toji, and instructs him to send out his men to the various highways to intercept Yoshitaka's flight. Meanwhile, Yoritomo's daughter, Ohime, is languishing in grief, and his wife, Masako, warns him not to hurt his son-in-law, to which Yoritomo gives only a vague reply. 5 days later, one of Toji's followers, a samurai named Mitsuzumi, returns to Kamakura and reports that he has tracked down and killed the young lord Shimizu. Yoritomo's daughter Ohime soon learns of this news and, devastated by it, she immediately goes on a hunger strike, refusing any food. So great is her grief that her mother Masako is furious with her husband. In order to allay Masako's anger, Yoritomo orders that the man who killed the boy should himself be beheaded, even though Yoritomo had essentially ordered the execution. The execution of the executor brings to an end one of the saddest chapters in the whole of the Genpei story. At the same time that Yoritomo is dealing with the flight of his son-in-law, he learns a couple of other pieces of news. One is that his brother Yoshitsune, after his surprise victory at the Battle of Ichi-no-Tani, has been awarded titles by the retired emperor, which Yoshitsune has accepted without Yoritomo even knowing about it. "I knew this would happen," Yoritomo tells his wife. "The old emperor will seduce my brother, and then whose orders will he follow?" The other piece of news is that Lord Shigehira, the Heike commander who was captured alive at Ichi-no-Tani, is now being brought to Kamakura. As soon as he arrived, Yoritomo arranges to have his Heike captive awarded luxurious quarters where he is attended by entertainers, musicians, and a famous courtesan named Senju no Mae. While Shigehira is being entertained, 10 guards nightly stand watch outside his residence, for Yoritomo realizes he now has a very valuable prisoner. A few days later, Yoritomo invites Shigehira to an audience in his main reception hall. Shigehira is brought in by Yoritomo's guards and ordered to bow low before Yoritomo's seat. Yoritomo looks down at the prostrate Heike lord and says, "You know, more than 20 years ago I was made to bow before your father, Kiyomori, when I was just a teenager. Strange to think that Kiyomori's son is now bowing before me." Shigehira keeps his eyes to the floor and says nothing. "I hear your brothers refused to bargain for you." "Yes," Shigehira said, "but I never believed I was so valuable to them they would surrender the regalia for my sake, although I suspect my mother tried to convince them otherwise." Says Yoritomo. "So Go Shirakawa has acceded to my request to have you sent here. I trust our hospitality is more comfortable than if you had been handed to the monks of Nara." "Yes," says Shigehira, "I appreciate your hospitality, and Senju no Mae is a wonderful musician." "Ha, she is indeed," says Yoritomo. "So, tell me, when you destroyed Nara, did you do it on your father's orders, or was it your decision? I heard it was a particularly awful atrocity." Shigehira sits up and looks Yoritomo in the eye. "I went there to put down the monks' lawlessness. The destruction of the temples simply happened. I could do nothing about it. But I was in command, and as they say, the man at the top shoulders the blame. Presumably the shame heaped upon me now is already retribution." Shigehira looks out the window and sighs. "Looking back over my life and all my deeds, I see bad karma soaring higher than Mount Sumeru. But I have atoned. I have learned from the great teacher Honen, who taught me the heart of Pure Land teaching. Though my sins are grave, by renouncing evil, I can be born at last into paradise." "A noble sentiment," says Yoritomo. "It seems your nephew Koremori has been looking for similar atonement. I'm not sure if you have heard, but your nephew has taken his own life after rowing a boat out into the open ocean near Kumano. He apparently tried to reunite with his wife and children in the capital, but he couldn't reach them. There are even rumours he was planning to turn himself over to us, the Genji. I would have welcomed him, of course, but alas, it was not so. It seems your clan members would rather take their own lives than submit to my command. For a moment, Yoritomo's voice softens and says, "Perhaps if your father and mine had been able to reconcile their differences all those years ago, we wouldn't be in this intractable situation." For a while, Yoritomo appears lost in thought. Then he returns to the present and says, "But the distrust between our clans has gone too far, it seems, for reconciliation. Your brother's response to Go Shirakawa's letter has made that very clear. I have a copy here of what Lord Munemori sent. And, I quote, Yoritomo has forgotten old kindnesses and ignored goodwill to raise, as might a starving wolf, foul rebellion. Such indescribable folly begs divine chastisement and courts lasting destruction." As Yoritomo finishes reading, he rolls up the parchment and glares at Shigehira, who nods and says, "My brothers will not give up until their last breath." Yoritomo puts down the letter and says, "Well, since they have abandoned you, you must be curious what I plan to do with the rest of your clan. And since you are my captive, there is no issue with me telling you. My general, Noriori, will head down the coast to gain support from the clans of Kyushu. Meanwhile, my brother, Yoshitsune, will drive a stake into the heart of the Heike." Shigehira looks up in surprise. "You mean he will attack Yashima?" Yoritomo nods. "But none of your Genji troops know naval warfare. Yashima is a seaport. We made a mistake at Ichi-no-Tani by allowing you to fight on land, but at sea Yoshitsune is inexperienced. Yashima is strong. The Heike will win." Yoritomo smiles at his captive. "We shall see." At that moment, on the coast of Japan's inland sea, in the midst of a raging storm, things are not looking good for the Genji forces. The Genji general, Yoshitsune, has promised his men that he will pursue the Heike by sea to the furthest range of the oar. But it is an argument over oars that now threatens to derail the Genji advance, even before they have launched their attack. "We need to install bow oars, sir," shouts Kajiwara above the howling wind. "Otherwise we cannot make the crossing to Yashima." "Bow oars?" yells Yoshitsune, his voice barely audible in the wind. "What are they?" "But with a horse, sir, you can turn it left or right, but not in a boat. It's much harder. We'll fit side rudders as well, and then we can move the boat in any direction, and move it back if we need to." "What?" screams Yoshitsune. "A warrior heading into battle resolves not to take one backward step. Why prepare in advance to flee? What a way to get started. For me, normal oars are enough." Kajiwara retorts, "Sir, a good commander defeats the enemy by advancing when he can and retreating when he must. That's how to stay alive. Charging blindly like a maddened boar, that's not good at all." "Ha!" spits Yoshitsune. "Wild boar, deer, who cares? That's what you told me before at Ichi-no-Tani. And I proved everyone wrong. Making war means attack, Kajiwara, and victory is sweet." He turns to the men lining the shore. "So, who is with me?" The Genji warriors look to each other and hesitate. Many can be seen to be siding with Kajiwara. "Yashima is there for the taking, men. This is our moment. I repeat, are you with me or not?" In the next episode, Yoshitsune launches a daring attack on Yashima with just a tiny group of men. Can he repeat the same success he achieved at Ichi-no-Tani?